Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second part of our community conversation about led by the Rochester Area Community Foundation, hosted by the Rochester Area Community Foundation, about the COVID-19 crisis and the effects it is having and will continue to have on the arts locally, even as we start the state's phase-in reopening that begins this Friday. As we know, the arts is not scheduled to till phase. Sorry. There are questions even about that, but it's all part of the process. I do also want to let everyone know that NYSCA is offering grants for arts organizations of all sizes and as well as for individual artists. We will post that information on the Foundation's resource page. Next slide, please. For some housekeeping, please note that your control bar on the right is controlled by the orange arrow at the top. You will see a questions panel where you can type in your questions at any time. We will record today's session and make it available to anyone who is interested. Next slide, please. For today's session, Simeon Master from the Community Foundation will discuss staff analysis of the crisis's financial impact on the arts throughout Rochester pre-COVID and post-COVID, as well as present an overview of an arts vibrancy map of our region. Additionally, we will have panelists talk about their own sectors representing theater, music, arts, and education, as well as representatives of 2 local arts collaboratives. And we will close with question and answers. With that, I'll turn it over to Simeon.
Morning, and thank you for joining us for this conversation that really helps us to focus on what's going on in the arts community. Annette mentioned earlier that we're looking at the phased reopening process, and as we do so, we want to be mindful about the role that the arts plays in Rochester, in our region, and to think broadly about the arts, that arts isn't certainly just confined to any niche area, but really permeates the fiber of this community, particularly one that has proclaimed itself as a community and city of the arts. And so we're excited to work with all of the folks that are on this call so that we can deliver that message. And in the meantime, in order to be able to do so effectively, we knew that it was important to gather some preliminary information, some data about the kind of arts ecosystem in Rochester. And so we have a couple of things to share on that front. Next slide. And so one of the things that we wanted to try to achieve was to really get a sense of what was going on in Rochester pre-COVID. And so this map was a map that we at the Community Foundation funded in order to get a picture of arts vibrancy in the region. And this map tells an interesting story where you see green indicates more vibrancy, and where you see lighter colored green transitioning to red, you see less vibrancy. And so at first glance, it looks as though this tells a story of a vibrant city and less vibrant surrounding community. What's important though is to take the data that is in the right bar, and we'll be making this resource available to those that are interested, if you just let us know. And that right bar, the data that's there helps us to overlay some demography and other pertinent information to have a deeper understanding of vibrancy in our region. Next slide. And what really kind of emerges is a couple of things. Number one, it does confirm that we do indeed have a vibrant arts community in Rochester as a relative matter. The map is done in a way that it compares us with other similar sized communities around the country. And as a relative matter, we have a vibrant arts community. We also have proximate offerings, and why that's important and what that means on that, if you again visualize the prior slide, is that we saw that concentrated green. It was just an indication that arts was close by, but the secondary question is whether those arts were widely accessible. And one could certainly make an argument that while they were proximate, particularly to communities that were among the most economically challenged, that our offerings were not necessarily as widely accessible. And so there's some real questions of equity that a number of us were beginning to wrestle with, both as organizations, but also as individual artists in the community, providing access to folks that were interested in exploring art, both in the professional sense as well as part of cultural enrichment. The other defining characteristic that we noticed kind of pre-COVID was the emergence and kind of growth of the advocacy effort around arts. And that looked like everything from Rock Arts United to Arts in the Loop, and a myriad of other efforts that were coming together that represented organizations and artists who were beginning to articulate to the city of Rochester, to Monroe County, and indeed to the region, the importance of arts. And that was beginning to happen with more efficacy. We've also seen the hopeful rebirth of the Arts and Cultural Council. And we're really trying to lean in to see if there's an opportunity to really strengthen the council as an entity to represent the interests of both organizations and individual artists. Next slide. So as we moved into the crisis, we felt the need to understand, again, the arts ecosystem to get a sense of organizational survivability and sustainability. And we had a couple of tools that we want to share with the community that we've utilized to do so, including some sector data that we've tried to gather, and then also to identify some survey resources and follow-up calls that our team has done to confirm what we learned through some of the tools. Next slide. So the CUSP tool, the COVID Urgent Service Provider tool, was a resource that was designed and it was intended to help funders and philanthropists and donors to really evaluate the capacity of nonprofit organizations in a respective community, and to overlay the needs of a respective organization with the capacity to meet the needs of the communities in which they serve. It was provided by a firm, BCT Partners, out of New Jersey, that we've been doing some close work with. Next slide. And so this is a kind of a glimpse at the tool. Really quickly, what you're looking at is kind of moving from left to right. The first column, identifying organizations. We're able to identify organizations by sector. And so in this case, arts, culture, and humanities-based organizations. But we also look at human services. We look at a whole myriad of different types of organizations. We have in the next column descriptions of the kinds of programs that they offer. The tool used very advanced machine learning and other resources to be able to kind of more accurately identify the type of organization. So it drew from a database, the taxonomy at NTEE, but then added some additional layers. The location of its headquarters. The next column is one that describes community need, and without kind of going into the weeds, essentially what they're trying to get at here is the proximity to community need and then the relative output that an organization is making in terms of programmatic expenses. And so it's a rough way of kind of getting a sense of whether an organization is positioned to meet the needs of the community that they're in. And again, I could go way into the weeds on this. I will spare you, but if you have any interest, certainly just let us know and we can delve more deeply. Ask some questions about community diversity. And then the balance here is really about the functional expenses that an organization has. And so that's reported on a 990. They took that, divided it by 4 to develop a 3-month functional expense, recognizing that organizations have ebbs and flows. And so One 3-month period may look different, particularly in the arts and cultural organizations than others. And then they offered a way of measuring whether those forecasted reserves were going to be whether they were more than 3 months or fewer than 3 months. Sorry, just had my little ones walk in, forgive me. But more than 3 months or less than 3 months. And then finally, there's some information about COVID cases that are active in a given county that the organization finds itself. So this tool has been essential for us in understanding what's going on in the field and having a better sense of the kinds of organizations, the types of organizations. And then we have the opportunity to overlay this with additional data to try to read out more specifically questions around equity, amongst other things. Next slide. And so what we found is that in the 8-county region that we currently are operating in, we have 119 arts and culture organizations. Before this, frankly, a lot of us didn't know that number. And so this has been an important exercise just for that benefit alone. 41 of those organizations have forecasted reserves of less than 3 months, which means that we have in our 8-county region, which includes Monroe County, the 5 contiguous counties, and then Seneca and Yates County, 34% of arts organizations show sign of serious fiscal strain. And then in Monroe County, specifically, 75 organizations, 30 of whom show forecasted reserves of less than 3 months, 38% signs of fiscal strain. And so what we're talking about is a third of our arts community, at least by this metric, that's at significant risk of not being sustained through COVID-19. And that's very serious. That represents significant attrition. And we also know that this is just the organizational level. When you layer on top of that individual artists, we're doing some work now to try to tease out using the census data's census occupation data, professional artists, and then we're trying to kind of go even deeper. That the implications for our community are very, very dramatic. And so this certainly isn't intended to be a scare tactic as much as it is an opportunity to really just highlight that this is very, very serious, and there is an opportunity for us to work together to try to do something about it. Next slide. In addition to, so we can never just take the data as provided from a quote unquote objective source as the gospel, as it were. And so we felt the need to kind of follow up. And we also know the relational dimension, frankly, of the work that we do. And so we just wanted to connect with organizations and artists just to get a sense of how people are experiencing COVID-19 and to really be smart about how we're mobilizing resources, because we do want to continue to expend dollars in this area, as we have already. I'll talk about that in a second. Some of the survey responses that we received back, what we were trying to tease out is liquidity, run rates, some of what you saw on the prior slide, reserves that are available, and we compared the data. What we learned was that of the 30 folks that we were able to connect with, a dozen or more had little or no reserves, basically confirming what we saw in the CUSP data. And that we also learned that the PPP, the EIDL, those were the Economic Injury Disaster Loans and the Paycheck Protection Program loans through the CARES Act. Many people had applied, but there was definitely a correlation between more established organizations and those that had kind of banking relationships and those that got their dollars. And so a lot of smaller organizations without those relationships were not as successful. And so there's definitely that implication for us to take into account, again, as we think about equity. We also learned that there are challenges beyond just payroll. So there's lost event revenue, class and field trips, disrupted programs. For individual artists, we're talking about salaries that are lost, or frankly, the way that folks pay bills and afford life. So very, very, very significant. Next slide. So now we're looking at our next steps and trying to figure out, kind of where we go from here. I'll share that we've had the wonderful opportunity. We saw Rachel pop up on the screen a second ago to work with Woke Arts and to do a Live Aid type event about and to raise some dollars for individual artists of color. We've had the wonderful opportunity to work with Rocco and the team there and the development of a works progress administration style program, and we're excited about what that might portend, and we're learning more. Many of you joined a call this past Saturday specifically about that, and so very informative and really excited about that potential opportunity. And of course, we're doing our normal grant rounds and trying to ensure that we're being flexible about deadlines and so on and so forth, so that we can ensure that that we don't want to be an additional burden for folks as they go through this very challenging set of circumstances. We're also mobilizing funds as we look forward, and the data and context that we're making, the survey information, is really going to inform the distribution of those funds, and so that's really going to be the basis for how we make decisions moving forward. We're going to continue to work with advocacy organizations like the Arts and Cultural Council, who specifically, and we want to grow its capacity. And we also are, have some work underway to create a new website, to update its database, and really to initiate the executive director search, because a strong Arts and Cultural Council is going to be an essential tool in representing the interests of artists and individual artists, particularly to the municipalities and other decision makers. I'm thinking folks like Bob Duffy, who's responsible with engineering the reopening here in Rochester. We want to make sure that there's a vehicle to communicate effectively what's going on in the arts community so that it's not overlooked. And finally, we want to really think about this thing as an entire ecosystem. And so not just organizations, but we're also thinking about individual artists. We're thinking about teaching artists. We're thinking about the for-profit entities in the community, and making sure that we're able to sustain the vibrant cultural region that we've all come to enjoy. So we'll stop there. I'll turn it back over to Annette to introduce panelists, but just suffice it to say that we're excited to continue our work with all of you. We understand and empathize with the challenges, the pain. We too are going through our own set of challenges, but we're confident that working together, partnering together, that we are indeed going to get through this. And if we do this the right way, if we're really smart about it, we'll come out on the back end stronger than we were when we went into it.
Thanks, Simeon. Before I turn over to our next speaker, I will launch a poll. As Simeon just mentioned, the Arts Council, we would love to hear your thoughts on what a revamped, stronger council would mean to you. And as those are coming in, I will introduce our next speaker, Blue Cease, Executive Director of Rochester Contemporary Arts Center, will speak about a project he is bringing to the community to do a WPA style arts project, and he hosted a town hall this Saturday and can tell us a bit more about that. I will close the poll in a second. And I will I'll share the results. So it looks like advocacy and access to resources are the most important needs. That is really helpful information for us. And I will turn it over to Blue. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, yeah, thanks for allowing me to say a couple words about our conversation on Saturday. Specifically, I wanted to mention again and thank you, Annette and Simeon, for being so visible, specifically, from my vantage point, and I know others within the art community. I think sometimes it can feel like the arts are celebrated in our community when all is well. But perhaps thought of as not essential when things are difficult or complex. And I think you two have done a terrific job in organizing, talks like today. And there was another one last week that I was a part of, helping organizations apply for PPP in a way that I didn't see from any other larger entity. So I think I'm really grateful for that. Thank you. And that's really sort of, you know, the sentiment behind what I wanted to try to pose a question around. We know the significance of the arts and cultural community and industry in our region. It's not a hobby for many people, many organizations. We're talking about a significant sector of our economy. And you know, this led me to sort of gather this WPA reference, and which has been bandied around a lot over the last couple of years. You know, could this country use a WPA style update, a new federal project? And I think that from within the art community, the answer is absolutely yes. But maybe more locally, is it interesting to think about what something like that could look like just in our, say, Monroe County or region? What would it look like to hire a significant number, hundreds of artists, to document and explore what we're going through, what our community is doing and responding, and how we engage with this crisis and how we come out of this crisis? I kind of informally will call that sort of a doubling down on the arts. So we, on Saturday, we had 5 community leaders, a few of which are on this call today, and Simeon and myself, and each person shared their thoughts on this real exploratory idea, but also posed a question, the real goal being to generate an active conversation on social media and in the Zoom chat, gathering lots of questions and feedback. And I'll just mention a couple real quickly. I think some of the more salient and critical points had to do with, of course, ensuring equity in any such project, baking that in from the beginning. And a couple interesting comments about a neighborhood focus. You know, could that be an organizing principle or structure of such a project? There were comments about such a project being open to all media. Of course, you know, sometimes when we think of art, we think of paintings, or if you're in a different sector of the art community, when you think of the arts, you think of performing arts. But really, perhaps something like this should be all media considered. And then we had a few touch points related to other more modern examples of artist funding mechanisms, specifically funding artists, of course, more modern than the WPA, and some of those models are in place now in other cities. And of course, the conversation about what's next, and how we start to move this conversation forward and approach philanthropy and approach the city and the county. We all know the county is funding the arts in our area to the tune of $1.4 million, and that has been relatively steady. And the city has, well, that county support is $900,000 to one single organization. So just as an example of an arts funding mechanism that really seemingly needs to change, needs to evolve. And my question, I guess, is, you know, isn't this the right time for that to evolve, perhaps in this direction, specifically funding artists to help us jumpstart our arts and cultural economy out of this crisis?
Thank you so much, Blue. I think that project offers a lot of opportunity for the community and a way to move forward and represent what people have gone through during this crisis. So look forward to how that progresses. And next, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. Can we share that slide, please? We are so grateful to have several arts leaders in our community who will talk to us about arts and education, theaters, specifically small theaters. We have so Annette Ramos, teaching artist and co-executive director from Rochester Latino Theater Company. Larry Moss, and Kelly Cheadle, both from Origami. Larry also is with Teaching Artists Rock, and Kelly is with Rock Arts United. Don Bartolo, founder and artistic director of Hummingbird Theater, president of Theater Rocks. Rachel De Guzman, executive director of Woke Art Collaborative, and Zaya Roll, a booking manager and musician. I will turn it over to them and hopefully can get our technology to work. Thank you all for being here. Annette, please take it away.
Good morning and hello everyone. Annette Ramos here from Rochester Latino Theater Company. I have been blessed to be a teaching artist in the Rochester community for 20 plus years. So as this new paradigm of art making is upon us and we are challenged to transform the very creative process that we work in and through, we, teaching artists, the invisible workforce in the gig economy, and we are the most vulnerable of the arts education ecosystem, often being hired last, fired first, and caught in the cycle of trickle-down economics. Although many art organizations will receive funding during these trying times, many teaching artists will not have their needs met. We simply don't have the infrastructure to apply for arts funding directly. As arts, Rochester's making landscape continues to transform, there's no going back. We need to create the new normal. And how can teaching artists continue to revitalize the creative economy? Well, teaching artists are ready to work. We are ready to start the creative work, restart the creative workforce. We do it and have been doing it for many years, healing our community through the arts in classrooms, in churches, in cafes. Every lesson plan, every curriculum a teaching artist has created has helped to heal and revitalize arts in our city. According to the World Economic Forum Future Job Report, creativity, originality, and initiative are three leading job trends for 2022. Well, teaching artists have them all, and we are ready to get back into work and to expand our region's potential in creating an inclusive arts culture. Teaching artists are ready to galvanize, empower, and educate our community of educators, providing new tools for them, as well as enriching the audiences in the classrooms, young and old, to learn creatively. Teaching artists are ready to contribute to the happenings across our region, big and small, real-time and virtual, and a combination thereof. Teaching artists are ready to create positive and playful experiences that leverage our region's legacy of ingenuity and reinvention. So, what are the needs of the teaching artist field in Rochester? Based on the national trends and member of the Association of Teaching Artists, we have been looking at national trends, and really these apply even more so to Rochester, New York. Teaching artists need advocacy, and we need empowered leadership to provide clear directives on how to navigate, how to get our needs met through legislation, through foundations, residencies, PDs, through internships. Who will be the next big employers of teaching artists in Rochester? And how can we create opportunities to hire teaching artists right in our own city? 2, teaching artists need to connect with the philanthropy community. Is anyone advocating for the voice of teaching artists and the needs? I believe that funders need to open up restrictions to meet teaching artists where they live and to help fulfill their basic fundamental needs. We are the most vulnerable aspect of the arts creative economy. TAs are the foot soldiers of the art workforce in our city. So who will stand up for us? And last, Teaching artists need accessibility to resources, professional development, grant and funding platforms, how to get funding, where to find it, micro grants, art funding for community projects, city and Monroe County funding, nationally funded community projects, and grant writing resources. The time is now. We need to bring together all these stakeholders, and how can teaching artists be at the table with art leaders, with funders, with the business and tourism sector, and how can we streamline new ways of supporting the work on the ground floor? Please, let's ensure that teaching artists are at the table and our voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. And I think this is a perfect segue to Larry to talk about your work with Teaching Artists Rock.
Great. So thanks for letting me talk about this. Annette did a great job talking about the need for teaching artists, what teaching artists in general do. Teaching Artists Rock is a group of teaching artists that have come together to work together to promote what we all have to offer and to work as a group to get into the schools, the rec centers, the senior centers, all of the places where activities and learning take place. And the focus, so the group originally came together as a number of artists that had previously been with Young Audiences of Rochester, a phenomenal organization that existed in the community and across the country for many years, decades, yeah. And when that organization ran into financial troubles, there was clearly a need. You had all these artists that were very focused on getting into or doing their work, teaching their art, teaching with their art, sharing their skills and resources. And what you didn't have was a group that knew how to sell themselves, because they were part of this other organization that did that for them. So we all came together, those of us that had been in Young Audiences before, and said, we're going to work together as a group and get out there in the community. And one of the first things that we set out to do to bring attention to ourselves was plan a public showcase where we could show off all of the various things that our couple dozen artists had to offer. And that showcase, so we put the last year we had been planning, we had been working on this, trying to get out there, and the showcase was supposed to happen the week that we saw the lockdown, and everything was canceled. So we ran into a number of troubles related to that. I mean, for starters, here was a new organization trying to pick up where one had left before. And at that point, couldn't, all of our effort was focused on something that went away. So we had to start over. And here we are, as we're all talking about a post-COVID environment, trying to rebuild. We never got off the ground in the first place. So that's been an interesting way to rethink things and look at the environment that we're in. But one of as we've gotten together now and we're starting to look at where to go next, there's been talk of the next showcase and how do we go and do this. But instead, we're actually looking at this as an opportunity. When we look at education right now and all of the people that are looking at homeschooling and the new environment for learning and online classes, everybody is learning. So as we're reinventing ourselves, we're actually trying to reinvent the place that we fit in, and trying to establish, work with teachers. You've got teachers, educators, all sorts of the rec center administrators that are trying to figure out where to go. We have offerings that we want to present to them. So our focus right now is on this whole digital learning and how we can adapt, how we can, rather than focus on just a showcase. Like the first thing we did, our gut reaction was, well, put the showcase online, put videos online of all of the artists. And while that was a good first step, really what this has to be about now is redesigning the materials that we teach in a way that works well with the online learning experience. So what we're working on, what we're talking about as a group, the tech we're exploring, it's not so much about trying to take the things we were already doing in the classroom, which were based on hands-on touch, interaction with the students, but trying to create something entirely new. You can point a camera at somebody teaching. That's not the same experience as being in the classroom. So as long as the experience is new, it's devised something from the ground up, using our skills, applying it to this new environment. So while we're working on that and trying to develop all of that, we face the challenge now. Annette talked about the funding piece, which certainly fits the need with having to get tech and trying to get resources that we're not used to having. But it's also getting out to those teachers and those centers where with the letting them know what we're trying to do, because the first response again from teachers, as we said, well, you know, all of our programs were canceled. Instead of canceling, can we present them online? It was, yeah, but you know, this is all a new thing for us. Why do we want to do that? So really, it's educate our audiences to understand that we are trying to work with the new tools we have. We are not trying to reproduce the old. We're also looking forward, since we have no idea how long this is going to be the environment that we're living in and teaching in. We're kind of looking at, while we're all anxious to get back into the classrooms where we can all work hands-on with the kids or with the seniors or whoever it is that we're working with, we realize that it's going to be a long-term thing. And if we can devise an online learning experience, we can actually reach potentially a larger audience down the road, because we will have developed something that does make use of the technology and allows people to learn in new ways and to experience art and education differently than they did before. Yeah, so that's really it for us. Is you know, here we were launching an organization. You talk about the need for an organization to pivot to a new environment. This was pivoting before we even got off the ground. So it's going to be, it really is about educating the audience we're trying to reach as to what we have to offer in this new learning environment.
Great, thank you so much. Kelly, do you want to jump in now and talk a little bit about Rock Arts United and what the group has been doing through the crisis?
So, funny story. Obviously, when this crisis hit, you know, I think we met probably the week before everything kind of shut down, and the discussion there was, hey, this COVID thing, you know, we were all operating off of like very little information on how it was going to affect us, what was coming on the pike, how it was affecting different countries, and we had been focused for the last several months on you know, individual working groups working on different particular projects, whether it was making sure that as we approach this arts advocacy piece to the city of Rochester, that we're making sure that voices from across the city are being heard, not just geographically, but socioeconomically, race, ability, you name it. We want to make sure that everybody is being heard. And this kind of threw a monkey wrench into things, because you know, we're volunteering together to try and work on things, and you know, when there's a hole in the boat, it's not time to sit down and have a long discussion. You've got to figure out how to stay afloat. So a lot of our individual artists that were working together have been focused on doing just that, making sure that their families are taken care of, that their basic needs are being met, you know, trying to navigate a rapidly changing environment. While I think as artists we are more resilient because we're used to being scrappy and used to seeing things in different ways, it's still a challenge. So I'm looking forward to, now that things, I won't say they've settled, because we're still, you know, like we're in the second inning of a game that's likely to go into overtime. I did a sports reference, holy crap. But so, you know, while the latest from the governor is that the Rochester, Monroe County, Finger Lakes region is ready to move up to level 1 of opening, you know, what does that look like? And what does that mean? So even for ourselves here at Aragami, we will be able to have staff return. Not that we have a huge staff, but before it was the two of us that are living together and working together. So, we've got each other's cooties already, but we start bringing somebody else in. We've got to make sure that, we're keeping our employees safe. Where is the guidance for how you create art together safely, whether that's with, tools that we would normally just share and not think about it. Spaces that we're in, if we're building something where we could be this close to each other. We're also actively using our bodies. So some of the PPE protection that you've got limits, active breathing. So like, if you're really working, especially I'm thinking of our performers, like how does that work? And I recognize that there's not necessarily, this is all novel. So having to develop processes and develop systems that keep our art workers safe is just as important as making sure that like our meat packers are safe and that our office workers are safe. And it's always hard to see like, that on the list of like essential workers that the arts are like way down here. So like, no, we've been doing this work the whole time, guys. You just haven't noticed, like what was the first thing that everybody did when we had the stay-at-home orders? We all tuned in online and we listened to music that people were like taking out their guitars and just playing. People were doing poetry. People were like reaching out. They were expressing themselves and connecting to each other. So I'm hoping that as, not only as we learn how to live in this, hopefully progressively more open environment as far as a connection and physical proximity pieces, I hope that we can also hold the fact that it was the arts that really helped to keep our stuff together. I won't cuss, but you know what I mean? Like when you're losing it, what did you turn, like you turned on the music that like those heart songs, those things that like really got to you, like that's what got us through. So let me just check my notes, sorry. Yeah, and again, going back to what we were doing pre-COVID and post-COVID, it's not even post yet, mid-COVID, the creation of art requires a level of privilege or a level of sacrifice. So as we are looking at things opening up and looking at ways that we can support our artists to create, we have to make sure that that connection to capital, connection to people, connection to resources is as equitable as possible. And all of these GoToMeetings, we don't have an interpreter here. So anyone who's deaf is not understanding what's being said right now. And that's the extent of my sign. I'll butcher it if I try and go any further, but like, live captioning, like what are our options? What's the guidance going forward on how we could, like how do we kind of manipulate the tech and the options that we have available to make it work. Right now I'm doing a lot of work personally, like this is my art at the moment is focused on using some of those sewing and whatever skills to try and fix what I can fix. So actually tonight I'm doing a live stream of how to make a cloth face mask that I designed, yay, that has a clear window. And as Rochesterians, we've got the largest, if not the largest, the second largest deaf and hard of hearing population per capita of like anywhere in the US. So if you have the ability to make one of these, please make one, because you could be going to the grocery store and the nice person at the register can't understand what you're saying because your face is covered, and that's not accessible. So as we're looking at creating art, is the art that you're creating accessible to the audience that we have here? So that's my bag.
Thanks, Kelly. Really good point about accessibility, and something for us to be very mindful of. And speaking of challenges performing with all that, I'll turn it over to Don.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's good to be here. I am the president of Theater Rocks, which is dedicated to unifying theater in Rochester. There are 22 members, and we have been an organization since 2009. The impact in theater is at 3 different levels. The first one, the professional or equity theaters, like Jiva and Bristol Valley, have had to totally close and suspend their current season. The next level is companies like Blackfriars, JCC, that have a paid staff and pay the actors for performances. Now, those are 2 different levels. Blackfriars and JCC occasionally have an equity actor, but rarely. And then the largest group of theaters in Rochester are what I call independent theaters, companies, right? And those companies have no paid staff, no building that they own, and usually will use a space like MUC, the Multi-Use Community Culture Center. But as you look down these sheets, I've listed all of them so that you can see. Now, there are 2 pages, but one of the things that has begun to happen is that some of the theater groups are beginning to produce online entertainment. For example, every Friday night at 7 o'clock, the improv group has a comedy. The Classic Theater Company, which is independent, they held auditions on Zoom. They are running 2 different, you got 2 up there? Yeah. They are running 2 different ways of presenting a show. The show is Pygmalion, scheduled to be done in August, and they are rehearsing both online, and then hopefully they will be able to move in to the MUC Theater. If they can't, they're going to produce the first show online. And I want to mention JCC, who very shortly, Ralph was in a 10-minute single monologue about this pandemic. It was excellent, just excellent. The theater companies depend on ticket sales to survive. I just want to add something to what Kelly said. One of the reasons we're on the last level is not because we're not essential. It's because we've got all those people sitting together. Now, whether or not that is going to be able to be something we can work out, you know what the baseball players are going to do? They're going to perform in front of no one. But the other thing I want to mention, and this goes back to my background in education, we need to learn how to use a combination of online and live. Example, take an artist or a theater company like mine that could put online a video clip of our show that's coming up next, and how inviting that would be. So I just want to say that, Annette, I'm very pleased that the foundation has put on its agenda reviving Rochester Arts and Cultural Group. I feel very strongly about this. And I think before we go too far, we need to make sure that we reinvent that organization. So hang on, there will be theater. Oh, one other thing I want to mention. During this time, I wrote a play. And I had a table read, which means you bring together a cast and they read it. I had a table read with people watching from Seattle, all over the country. And this is a time to create as well as, no, I can't say that. Anyway, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. And it's great to hear about the innovation and creativity that is going on across all our arts platforms. Issue of equity was also raised, and which is perfect for our next panelist, Rachel Degusman, to talk about as the head of Woke Art Collaborative, and she can tell us more about that.
Thank you, and thank you, Annette. And I also want to thank everybody that's gone before me. These are all really excellent points, and I think it's really helpful. This is the second of these type of forums that I've been on since this, and it helps me think better to actually be able to then hear what other people are thinking about within their perspectives. And I thank Rochester Area Community Foundation for making this a priority both now and as Don was saying before the COVID-19 live. I will real quickly from the perspective of creating work online. I had actually wearing my At the Crossroads hat, that's something that I have been doing and working with Guy Thorne about being able to stream live some of the long table events I've had. And it is an experiment. It did not work out completely, but it's something that I have been playing with before anyway, just because of bigger impact. How do we monetize things like that? Recently, I had a long table with Korean adoptees that we had people contact us from Australia that wanted to be a part of the long table. And someone contacted me today. I sent out a little blast about it, and they had a friend in New York that was a Korean adoptee that had shared the long table all over New York City through their network. They saw this. So I think the potential is there. You know, it's very difficult to figure out how that actually puts income in people's pockets. And we don't really want to replace the in-person experience that we know that live in-person experience is so incredibly valuable. But I do think this is an opportunity for us to think differently. And then with the partnership of the Rochester Area Community Foundation and other philanthropists, figure out what's that mix where that's not just us giving away free content, but it actually still can be something that's sustainable. So when I was thinking about what to say, I'm here with my hat of Woke Art Collaborative, and that's really about equity. It was formed with equity in mind. And I thought about when I was doing my fellowship with the field and fostering more equity in the arts, I had the opportunity to do some visioning work with the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. At the time, they were doing the 2016 diversity study that they did. And it was so amazing to me that they actually did this study. And people in New York were so critical of it. It was like, I was just blown away. And they were like, this is not adequate. You know, you didn't include disability, which, as Kelly said, is critical for us to be thinking about as we think about comprehensive equity. But the one thing that seems really important to me that we adopt from that is the idea of creating a baseline. Because we're talking about before and after. The before, the arts sector in Rochester was segregated, and creatives of color were marginalized regardless of their perceived talents, and they experienced acute discrimination. We cannot look forward at a whole landscape that's in crisis right now, and not forget that that was what we started with. And I know a lot of people have been working on that, including the Rochester Area Community Foundation, but I think that's critical to say, and I say it because we have been making a little bit of progress, I think, pre-COVID, through the efforts of a lot of artists and a lot of organizations. And my concern is the slight momentum that we had made is going to be lost in the whole crisis at large. And I know that may not be true, but I think it's my fear. And I think it's critical that we rise to the moment and not let that happen. I was asked to talk about how Woke Art members are adapting during the crisis, the challenges they face, potential future projects, what support is needed moving forward. And I'll say Woke Art Collaborative members have lost a great deal of work due to closure of the schools, arts venues, and their own spaces. This work comprises most of their income. Many of the creatives and spaces have produced online classes, concerts, and demonstrations. Some have been able to get compensation through vehicles like Cash App, but not everyone's work is so adaptable, and creatives have varying access to donors and technology. The safety nets which have been established for gig artists have been hard to access. Some are still waiting for both stimulus and CARES unemployment checks. That is certainly troubling, and for some, a crisis in a crisis. Without sharing anything about who said it, I will say that one COVID-19 Live Rock emergency grant applicant's response to how the pandemic had impacted them just replied, "I have no income, I have no food." And to me, some people wrote much more, but that was the most powerful thing that someone wrote. I mean, many well-known and respected Black, Indigenous, and POC artists have low incomes and little safety nets in good times that makes them extremely vulnerable in times of crisis. But I want us to think a moment about the long-term impacts. These creatives are much more likely to work in the gig economy as teaching artists, contract workers in clubs or arts venues, as arts instructors, or as visual artists without representation or studios. There are very few cultural institutions in Rochester that were founded or run by Black and Brown people, which are nonprofits. And ironically, I found that out when doing the COVID, all the research and partnering with Annette, who was amazing, on COVID Live, and found out we were trying to find a partner of color, a nonprofit, and most of them, it seems, were established 10 to 20 years ago. There haven't been a lot that have been established recently, and I want to know why. It's one of the things I think we need to find out. There are very few Black and Brown people who work for institutions which will qualify for stimulus bailouts, should they come, or low or no interest COVID-related business loans. All of the arts venues are still closed. If the past is prologue, most of these venues will not expand their programming to be more inclusive. Under financial stress, they will focus on the tried and true. Other venues will go out of business. The school district is under unprecedented financial and institutional pressures. Arts instruction is often the first to be cut from budgets. So what happens to teaching artists? College and universities, one of the largest, if not the largest business sector in Greater Rochester, are furloughing employees. The sector does not know if there will be in-person instruction in the fall. What happens to the contracts with Rochester creatives? Other sources of income include the myriad festivals as we enter the summer and fall festival season. Summer is canceled. The fall is questionable. With social distancing, how many of the intimate bars and clubs that hired musicians and poets and comedians will be able to afford to hire them or even have room for them in their spaces, even if they don't go out of business? I'll focus on Woke Art Collaborative as an institution now. I had developed a financial model for sustainability for Woke Art Collaborative, which included below market income from our Dream Lab co-work memberships, affiliate membership program, membership space usage fees, as well as program admission fees. We launched the Seed Equity Investment Initiative to create a financial bridge to full membership. We received support from the initiative investors, including Memorial Art Gallery and Rochester Area Community Foundation, and others were in the pipeline to support. How do we reopen a collaborative space with the demands of testing and tracing? We have no capacity for that. With 46 members and 41 plus square feet, we can limit how many people are in the space at one time and comply with social distancing mandates. But with no paid staff, how do we comply and ensure the safety of visitors or members? With the economy as it is and will be, and the employment realities I've talked about, how can we expect members to afford membership, event space usage fees of $25 per day with no insurance riders, and monthly co-working fees of $25 to $50? As hard as it is for some to envision, that was even too much for some POC creatives in what was perceived as good times, which means as brilliant as our sustainability model was, the underlying assumptions no longer apply. So many of the POC venues or collaboratives, those that exist beyond the central city, are relatively new and therefore more vulnerable to the impacts of COVID-19, though they are essential to the communities they serve. That is why I suggested when I began, any visioning, strategies, and tactics which do not account for intersectional inequities will be short-sighted and prolong greater relevance for the sector and vibrancy for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Really, really great, important points. I know we're over time, and I apologize for that. Zalia, are you still with us? I know she was having technical issues. But I really wanted to get her perspective as a musician.
Oh,
there she is.
yeah, I'm here.
Thanks. There was a question that you might be able to address for one of our audience members about music and the singing community and how that might, without a vaccine, how does that affect performers? Will it be safe to be out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm fortunate enough where I'm so glad. First, I want to say I'm so grateful for all the things that Rachel had brought up just now regarding performing artists. I specifically work with a group, a corporation where I book and manage musicians under the umbrella of Silver Arrow. And I'm working with about 150 musicians in the Western New York area between Rochester, Buffalo, and Syracuse. The biggest challenge, not just for, this isn't just an issue for vocalists, this is for all musicians really, is how to actually perform together through this new platform of online streaming. There are no tools really available yet for that. And vocalists specifically, it is going to be a challenge when if we are able to get out even into bar scenes or anything like that and have to wear masks. That's not something that is really feasible, I think, for vocalists. I'm not sure, I hope that's answering that question, but I do know a lot of vocalists who are shifting, like many, towards the online platforms. We're looking at, through social media, of course, YouTube and Instagram, and really supporting each other in that way. But I do have vocalists who are shifting over to Twitch, which I don't know if many people are familiar with that one, because it's mostly been for gamers up until this point. But that's been a great platform for music compared to Instagram, which is extremely buggy. Zoom is also something that hasn't been working out too well for musicians when it comes anything past an acoustic vibe, for getting that audio quality that a lot of performers are looking for. One things I don't know if I have time to actually talk about some of the things that I wanted to bring up points of. Just with the musicians that I do work with, like I said, there's about 150 of them. A lot of them do also work in education, but at 25% of them were completely dependent on live performance. So this is the the group of musicians that have been affected most severely by this COVID pandemic. And I will say that the shift, there's a looming uncertainty of when this actually will end. And even as we look towards the reopening of New York, it is definitely looking like live performance as we know it will not return for the year of 2020. A lot of musicians have been trying to support each other within that knowledge base. And one thing that has been happening, there's a studio called the Green Room. Since they actually, the man who runs that, Matt Rammerman, he actually has resources available to create an environment. So he built up the capacity to live stream for musicians when we are actually able to gather again. So I'm really optimistic to see how that will look as we move towards hopefully towards the fall. We'll be able to actually come together again as musicians. I will say another point that I did want to bring up is that as I'm talking to the musicians that I work with specifically, I am concerned about mental health within the artist community and musicians that I work with. So that is something too that I hope that we can put on the table and see how we can support our artists as they're facing this inability to really express themselves in the way that they're used to and trying to transition towards this online presence, which is also something that now, as celebrities are also moving to that same platform, our local musicians now have to compete with the celebrities who are doing the same thing that we are. So also thinking about that and how we can actually create an atmosphere that is supportive of local musicians who are trying to compete with these celebrities, what that looks like. And yeah, I think those are the main things I was hoping to make sure I got in there.
Yes, thank you. Really appreciate that input. There was a question that I think is applicable to the panelists about mentorship or resources that artists can get or small organizations can get regarding moving to digital platforms and how can they do that. I don't know if anyone knows of resources out there.
So one of the things that we're working on, a group of us, Rena Golden and Writers in Books and a few other community teaching artists, we are doing a teaching artist presentation, a 3-day piece here in Rochester, New York. We're actually revamping it to go completely online and to really answer and provide resources that are needed, specifically exactly what you're talking about, the resources on how to do a webinar, how do you transpose your art that's very, very engaging and interactive to a whole new platform. So we're really being very mindful in that curation so that we actually leave the artist at the end of August, beginning of September, with actual tools and resources to get out and do this kind of work. Also, I want to just add that next week is Teaching Artists Week nationally. Let's celebrate our teaching artists in our community. Sponsor a TA, donate to WAC, get out, buy balloons from Origami. I am saying we are the hub, and I'm sorry, I'm pitching it because I am a member of the Association of Teaching Artists and the Teaching Artists Guild. We know how invisible teaching artists are, but we are the grunt and the army of arts. You can't do arts without the teaching artist. So I share this with you because next week's a great time to get out there, support your TAs, buy them a dinner, deliver, buy their art. It's as simple as that, and there are many resources. The last thing is the Teaching Artists Association is also going to be opening up their nominations for Teaching Artists Awards recognition. We have an entire city of teaching artists. Yesterday, I sat in a Zoom meeting. There was over 60 years of teaching artist professionalism in that Zoom meeting. Let's highlight that. Let's support our teaching artists.
I
Great.
did want to, and that I love teaching artists. I think that we need to support them. I did want to build on what you were saying about the training. I think the training is critical, but I also think the resources, having presented a lot of things recently, you have to have subscriptions. The free doesn't really work that well. You know, like for instance, for Zoom, if you want to go on Facebook Live with Zoom, you need to have the subscription to to a pro Zoom account and then a webinar. And then I'm sure that this is something that Rochester Area Community Foundation is subscribing to, what we're on now. So I think that we also need to be thinking about the disparity in resources available to artists. Some people have, you know, laptops and, you know, what we think of as essential tools. And then others, they don't have the essential tools. So even if we want to go online or you want to transition and they get the training, then we also have to be thinking about hard tools like computers and things like that, but also soft tools like access to accounts. And when the libraries are also closed, as they are right now, and I'm not sure where that is. I'm on the board, but where that is in the process, our meeting's Monday, but where that is in the, you know, in the phase 1, 2, 3, 4. But all these people who did use a library, which is a place where a lot of people get their access to online, they don't have that access too. So when you were asking the question about what resources could be made available, perhaps some of the resources that could be made available are hard and soft technology.
Okay, and Simeon, there's a question that.
Or can I comment on that too? I wanted to just say, as a teaching artist, I am all about the teaching, the mentoring, and yes, I absolutely think it's important that we get these things out there and teach more people how to use these tools that are there. But one of the things that I'm trying to do, or we with TA Rock, I mean, I'm sitting in a studio right now that is completely underutilized because we can't do the things that we normally do. And I'm trying through TA Rock to start not just the teaching. In a meeting we had last night, one of the things that came up, one of our members had said, you can't expect me to learn even more to go out and do the things that I already do. So I think one of the things that we should be doing isn't just the teaching how to use Zoom, but to set up the locations that artists can go into with the people that are available to do this.
Yeah, I mean, if the benefit of having the arts org before for teaching artists.
YAR.
Yeah, well, the benefit of having YAR was that, you know, the artists could focus on the art. Somebody else handled the billing. Somebody else handled the booking. It should be, the tech should have that level of support for our artists so that they can just focus on creating and not have to, like, that's something that could easily be funded and not necessarily have to be applied for by each individual artist. It's like, hey, you've got 2 hours in this space this week, or you've got, you know, like, oh, tell us what you want to do.
And it's not just the material resources, but the people, you know, that throughout this experience, we've been, all those of us that have been able to, have been starting to do the online classes and blending the technologies. I think that those of us that have done it should be sharing our skills as well.
And audio engineers and sound engineers that aren't doing the live shows, if we can get them pulled in to help, you know, I just want those artists to come in and be able to, like, you know, the freedom on your brain of not having to think of, oh my God, how am I going to connect to Twitch or the Zoom meeting or the green room?
You shouldn't have to.
You just walk in, room set up, your bowl of green M&Ms is there, and you perform like magic.
Right. So
I would say, yeah, if I can add to that, I actually would love to be a part of any group effort to assist with that for training or helping to gather resources for musicians to be able to do that, or and other artists as well. And I will say that the green room that I had mentioned earlier is one of those spaces where it's a recording studio, but that's where I'm saying that they have created resources specifically to transition into the online setting and assist musicians with that.
Okay.
All right, well, I wanted to get to this one question regarding funding for artists, because the question was, the onus seems to be on the artists to find funding, and it's very difficult. And I know we have crisis funding, but I didn't know if Simeon could address that question.
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of the crisis funding heretofore has really been for the provision of basic needs. Some of the work around food distribution, supplies, hygiene supplies, personal protective equipment, masks, and so on and so forth. That's really been the bulk of the crisis response so far. Part of this work that we're doing, and one of the reasons why we're hosting this webinar and have been doing a series of these and really collecting a lot of information, is because as we start to kind of pivot towards thinking about recovery, we want to make sure that we've got kind of broader, data so that we can make more informed choices that go just beyond the immediate crisis response. I did see that question come in, and I think one of the interesting challenges that I know I've been thinking about, so the census says that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of about 9,000 professional artists in Monroe County. It's like 8,900 or so. And it feels to me that that's an undercount, right? Pretty significantly. And so the question, though, of course, is, what constitutes a professional artist, right? And, where do you start to, right, draw that line, right? And so those are some of the questions, and I'm hoping that this and I'm starting to see our numbers dwindle a little bit. Go ahead and wrap, but this is really an invitation to a conversation. In that question, though, I also felt the urgency of that question. I believe actually the word "now" was capitalized, and so this is not intended to just be an ongoing dialogue that's interminable and never ends. It certainly has pointed to a conclusion of frankly, how we're mobilizing our dollars, and how we're also trying to get our philanthropists and donors that are part of the Community Foundation network, at least, in the involved in this effort, so that our real funds are expended. And finally, the goal is always, for us to really be kind of some of either the risk capital or the initial dollars in that then spur, additional resources. And so ultimately, one of the reasons why we were leaning in on this call to empowering the Arts and Cultural Council and other advocacy efforts is really to try to cajole where it's necessary, incent where it's necessary, persuade, or whatever it takes to get our municipalities and our government on all levels to really see the value and the impact of arts, not as something niche that sits off to the side and is nice to do after we get done with the real business of the community, but that indeed is an integral part of what it means to be a Rochesterian, or what it means to be part of this Finger Lakes region. So that's really where we're going to be leaning in. So the slide that's on your screen, again, continued analysis, continued dialogue, pointed towards action and getting something lifted off and done at the appropriate time. If you haven't done a survey yet, please, please, please do so. You can contact Annette Jimenez Gleason at the information that's on the slide to get the survey, to offer any additional input, and make sure that we're informed. I want you to know, this isn't like one of these deals where tell us what you think, and it's going to go into a black hole somewhere that will never be heard from again. We are literally shaping the program now, the grant funds that we'll be distributing in the arts area now, and we are taking into account all of the feedback that we're getting to try to make sure that this is structured in a way that is equitable and fair and just and effective and impactful. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Right there.
Great, thank you.
Time, but thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a great
Can we
day.
put that link to that survey on Facebook or something to make it easy to share?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Good
Bye,
day.
everybody. Be safe.
Okay, thank you.